morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of our audience members over here. My name is Animesh Pathak, and I am the chair for Invent, the startup track at IIT2020. Welcome to day two. A couple of quick pieces of stats, since we are all number lovers over here. Out of 450 startups who were candidates across 15 IITs, we have chosen 33 to be spotlit across 3 sessions. We had 16 in spotlight number 1 yesterday, US time, 10 in spotlight number 2 in India, and 7 coming up today at 12:45 p.m. Pacific. I also should let you all know that if you go on the main event website and go to the booths section, go to filter categories and startups, you will see all of the 450 startups and little tiny stations that they have set up as our startup showcase. I strongly encourage all of you to go visit them and check them out. We are also extremely grateful to the panelists and guides whom we are calling in true IIT style, the Funda women and Funda men. And yes, we did have Funda women with us. I'm very happy for that, which is a rare sight, unfortunately, used to be back in our days at IIT. We had people from NTT VC, Engineering Capital, Coastal Ventures, Seed Camp, Foundation Capital, Westwave Capital, Nexus Venture Partners, Trinity Ventures, Cake Ventures, and Emergent Ventures. And I'm only counting the US ones so far. There were 10 plus more on the India side as well last night. Extremely good sessions, including high tech in terms of information technology, but also a lithium ion battery that doesn't catch fire, or better satellite fuel. We've seen a whole bunch of interesting spotlights, and you will see some more today at 12:45. With that said, I will pass the baton to our mentorship chair and my partner and mentor in crime, Ashu Garg, who's a general partner at Foundation Capital. He's an IIT Delhi and IIM Bangalore alum, where he won the President's Gold Medal. He's also an all-around awesome guy. So without further ado, Ashu, over to you.
Thanks, Animesh. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashu Garg. I'm a general partner at Foundation Capital, an early stage, primarily seed and Series A investor in enterprise software companies. I've invested in roughly a dozen companies led by IITians, including Cohesity, Eightfold, Turing, and many others. But today, this panel is about Mohit Aaron. Mohit is a friend of mine who was the lead architect of the Google file system GFS, co-founder of Nutanix, and now founder of Cohesity. Mohit is an IIT Delhi alumni and also a Rice University alumni, and has been recognized as a distinguished alumnus by both universities, which is quite a rare honor. For me, the thing I've always been amazed by is Mohit's insatiable curiosity. Every time we talk, he tells me about some book he's read and asks me some question that I don't have a good answer for in the moment, and forces me to think. And so for me, it's been an honor knowing and working with Mohit over the last decade and being part of Cohesity from its earliest days. Joining Mohit in this fireside chat today is Carl Eschenbach. Carl Eschenbach is a unique individual who sort of traversed both sales and technical leadership roles. Very early on, got a degree from DeVry University, rose up the ranks in sales, and then joined VMware when it was 200 people, and was pretty much the first sales executive in the company. He spent 14 years at VMware, taking it to the company it has now become, leaving in 2016 as the president and COO of the company. He's now a general partner at Sequoia Venture Capital. And at Sequoia, in addition to being involved on the board at Cohesity, he's also on the board of a handful of iconic companies like UiPath, Snowflake, Zoom, the platform that we're on today. In addition, he's also on the board of Workday and Palo Alto Networks. I think it's rare for us to have someone who's on the board of so many decacorns all at the same time. So thank you very much, Carla and Mohit, for joining us today.
Thank you, Ashu. Good to be here.
Thank you, Ashu.
I'll let you guys kick it off.
Well, maybe I'll kick off. So thank you for having Mohit and I. I have the honor of working with Mohit at his company here at Cohesity, and it's been an amazing experience. I mean, when you talk about Mohit and the highlights of his career, it's pretty impressive. From his early days at IIT all the way to Rice, and being a distinguished alumni at both of those, to his early days of basically writing the Google file system that it continues to use today, and then going and starting his first, startup where he co-founded Nutanix, which is $1 billion company. But he wasn't done there and he wanted to do it again. So he went and started Cohesity, which is pretty amazing. You don't see people start multiple billion-dollar startups and have that entrepreneurial mind and spirit, but that's what we have in Mohit. So Mohit, sorry to embarrass you a little bit, but you're an amazing man, an amazing entrepreneur and founder, and now the CEO of a great company. So maybe I'll start by asking a couple questions on that journey, how you got to where you're at today, if that's okay.
That's fine, but let me just say a few words myself. First of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I feel blessed to be surrounded with some great people. And I must say, some of them are right here. Carl's on our board, one of the classiest board members I've ever worked with. Thank you, Carl, for your mentorship. And also, even Ashu is our board observer. So thank you, Ashu, for your faith and support. And Ashu is also a friend, and I do have fun times with Ashu discussing a whole variety of stuff. And I'm not the only one who gives him pain. He also gives some back to me.
Yeah, Ashu was correct, Mohit. You do read a lot of books, and then all of your friends have to hear about it, and you force them to read the book because you're going to ask them questions. So sometimes we avoid your call just because we don't want to have to read a book over a weekend. So let me start. So first of all, maybe, obviously this is an IIT conference. Why don't you talk about your experience at IIT, and then we'll talk about how that transcended and got you into Rice in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, my journey to the IITs, I think when I was growing up, it's not like my family had a lot of engineers, but my parents always pushed me to excel, and whatever they had a dream that people get these advanced engineering degrees from IITs, and so I think they propelled me on to do well in the what is the exam for the IIT called JEE, Joint Entrance Examination. So I got into the IITs, and I must admit that I had no exposure to computer science by that time, but just because I got a good rank, I think all of us IITians, we carry our JEE ranks very proudly. Mine was 53. So, I happened to get computer science, and turned out that it was a great match because it turned out to be my passion. And it was phenomenal in IIT because you're working with so many smart people. This is the cream of India, right? The best, students in India. It's also hard because you got to compete with them and get a good grade despite all those smart people. So a lot of learnings. My first time out of my parents' house, so that was a learning by itself, right? Kind of learning to stand on my feet. In home, everything is taken care of. My mom is cooking food, and everything happens at the right time. Here in my dome, nothing is happening at the right time. It's just a wild stuff, and you got to ace the grades despite all that. So I think that was a great learning experience. And in those times when I graduated in '95 from the IIT, so in those times, India hadn't made as much progress on the technology front from an industrial perspective. And so, I think the right way to get into advanced, industry or what have you was to take a step and go through higher education, which, by the way, I recommend anyway. I think that was a phenomenal experience to apply for, a scholarship. I got it from Rice University, and I spent a little over 5 years there. Doing a master's and then a PhD in computer science. My focus was distributed systems, but that's how I got to Rice in the US. But we'll leave that for another question.
A question there. So it sounds like you thought it was and you would recommend to other people listening here today to seek higher level degrees after your understudies. And maybe a second question. How do you think about going into higher level studies like you did and get your master's and PhD at Rice versus going right out of school and jumping into being an entrepreneur or founder? How do you think about that? And did that weigh on your mind when you were making that decision?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I see a lot of the young generation struggling with that question. Again, my recommendation is my personal recommendation, but I do stand by it. First and foremost, I strongly recommend going for advanced studies. One reason is that there is one style of education that we've seen in the IITs. You go for advanced studies, especially in some US university or somewhere else around the world. There is a exposure to different style of education, different sets of people, so it broadens you a little bit. Second, I think I would also say, even if people have aspirations one day to maybe do their own companies and stuff, let's understand that the technology world is moving very, very fast. Companies that thrive are the ones that have some depth in what they do. Frivolous companies, there are plenty of companies out there that get formed on very small ideas, and we all know that most startups don't do well. What I'm trying to say is that first learn how to generate significant knowledge. When we do a bachelor's, all we've done is we know how to read knowledge off of the books. We don't quite know how to generate knowledge, and going for higher studies helps you do that. And that is, I think, one of the key reasons why my companies have become unicorns, because there was depth behind it. I learned how to generate knowledge, not just learn what somebody else generated. Generating knowledge, and that brings some sophistication into the companies I was able to form. And so I would strongly recommend. I mean, what's the hurry? I see all these young generation kids hurrying into jumping to industry or jumping to doing their own companies. I mean, guys, once you leave academia, there's like 40 years of joining industry and doing stuff. Why don't you spend a couple more and learn a little bit more, because it will pay dividends for years and years to come. But Carl, this is also where I want to reflect this question back to you. You see so many entrepreneurs, you see so many companies. Carl is from Sequoia, which is the premier venture capitalist firm in the world, the best. I won't even say it's one of the best, it's the best. And you probably see a whole plethora of entrepreneurs that come pitch to you, and people that you select, and companies that become successful. What's your advice to that young generation who's struggling with the thought whether they should go for advanced studies, or whether they should jump to industry, or maybe do their own company? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you speak about it. Obviously, you went to track where you went and got higher level degrees, and now you generate knowledge. I like the way you think about that. You're now generating and bringing much deeper knowledge into the industry because of those advanced skills that you gained. At the same time, someone can say there's no better teacher than time and experience. So I don't think it's one size fits all, quite frankly. Both Anshu and I have, seen entrepreneurs be successful. Some of them never even went to school, which is even crazier. But I do think it is most critical that you do your studies and get as much knowledge as possible. What we look for, and I'm sure Ashu would say the same, when you think about entrepreneurs, one of the key attributes is not only can they, or should they, or must they have high IQ. That's obvious. Look at yourself. But they have to be highly resilient. They have to be gritty, because the failure rate when building a startup is quite high. And even the most successful startups and the most successful entrepreneurs actually go through tough times and challenges. And if you are not resilient, you don't have a lot of determination and grit, you cannot be successful as an entrepreneur. So we look at the person, and I know when I'm speaking to entrepreneurs for the first or second time, yeah, I spend a little bit of time getting to understand their intellectual horsepower and their background experience, like their colleges. But I also want to better understand how they grew up. What were the personal and professional challenges they've had to overcome to get to where they're at today? So I think that's critically important when we're talking to entrepreneurs. The other thing that I think is important is entrepreneurs and founders have to be very self-aware. They have to be aware of their strengths and their weaknesses. And as they're building company, they have to have the ability to go out and identify great talent, recruit them to their company. And that great talent that they're finding typically augments a lot of the weaknesses they have. So being self-aware about what you're good at is critically important. And I think Ashu and I have seen you do that. Mohit, you know, obviously you're an amazing engineer and product person, but you've gone out and filled out your team, your leadership team with people that would be additive to you in the company. So that's the other thing I think that's really important when we're looking at entrepreneurs, because, you know, there's many paths to success, but I think being humble and grounded is another key attribute in recognizing what you're good at, what you're not good at, and being able to go out and recruit the best talent to help you build companies is critically important. And we've witnessed that with you over the last multiple companies, not just here at Cohesity.
Thank you, Carl.
Now, maybe I'll come back to a question for you. You know, out of Rice, you joined Google. Is that correct? Is that your first?
Actually, out of Rice, I joined a small startup called Zambil. It was, supposed to be in the space of scale out NAS. I was there for a little about 2 years, and then I joined Google. Yes.
Yeah.
But the fun story is that I could have joined Google right after Rice. They were calling me. The fun stuff is that it was one of 10 search engines out there. Who knew it would be that successful? And I kept ignoring their pleas to come interview. And so
how many years did you spend then at Google?
I spent 5 years. So I graduated with a PhD in 2000. I joined this startup called Zambil in 2000, late 2000. And 2 years later, the Google people, the very well-known Jeff Dean, he and I knew each other from a research lab where I was an intern while I was doing my PhD, and he was an early employee. We knew each other from back then. So he was the one who was asking, at least come talk to us. And so finally, I think he found a way in 2002. He said, "Mohit, at least come have lunch with us." I'm like, okay. So he had kind of set up everything. It was a trap. I went in there, and he showed me after having lunch. He's like, "Let me show you some things." He took me from station to station. One station was Google News under wraps. Another station was Google Print under wraps. Another station was something else. And after like the 8th station, I realized that Google isn't just a search engine. It's doing something way more bigger. And that's when I said, okay, I think I will interview.
Yes.
And so that was end of 2002. And I joined Google early 2003. And I was there for nearly 5 years up until end of 2007. So five phenomenal years at Google. Yes.
That's amazing. So since this is the startup track, now we're going to transition to you being a founder and entrepreneur as a co-founder of Nutanix. Why don't you talk to the audience about that transition and how you came up with the idea to, start Nutanix as your first, company?
Yeah. I think the seed of going and doing something of my own was laid back, during the time I was doing my PhD. Like I said, I think in research, you learn how to generate knowledge. And there are really two tracks that interested me after that. Either stay in research and which is, by the way, it can be very rewarding. Either in a research lab or in one of the, premier educational institutions in the world. They were the top 10 universities who wanted me to come and interview for a faculty position. But I decided that the industrial track was more for me. But I wasn't happy just being part of some company. Again, I wanted to generate knowledge, but I didn't know how to do companies. It would be, silly to go and found a company. I mean, there's much more to just building technology. And so that's why, I joined companies, including Google, and there was one more after that. But there came a point when I got the confidence that I know enough, not just about generating knowledge and being a good technical person, but also about, leading people and maybe getting involved in the business side, go to market, that sort of stuff. And that's when a couple of us founded Nutanix. the genesis of the idea for Nutanix, again, startups are all about, changing the world, at least the kind that I like, changing the world and bringing something new into the world. And I think the genesis of that idea, the seed of that was laid sometime during my tenure in Google. So at Google, I was a part of what was called the Google file system team. It was a web scale file system that Google built to house its own data. And Google did that because Google did not afford to put the tremendous amounts of data it had on systems that they could have bought from other external companies like NetApp, EMC, or what have you, because that would be very expensive for Google. And anyhow, these systems did not scale. They did not have Google-like web scale. So while Google built a distributed file system, it still used it initially like people used to use the NetApps and the Isilons. So they would put the Google file system cluster on one side, and all the compute used to sit on the other side, and there was networking in the middle connecting them. And very soon they realized that this is not a model that's going to work out because the network was the bottleneck all the time. And so they started two different projects. One was to build next generation networking. And the second one, which was really the genesis of what triggered the idea behind Nutanix, was that how about we put compute and the Google file system processes on the same nodes. So the same Linux node that ran the Google file system process would also run their compute processes for doing crawls and searches and whatnot. And Google could do that. That was, and Google was its own customer. The compute processes would trust each other, the Google file system process, and there was no security between them. But that's not how this works in the real world. I knew there's a problem right there. If Google needed that, the external world would also need that. But there was the problem of security, the storage, processes, the Google file system processes in the external world can't trust the compute processes, and vice versa. I mean, when you have applications in the external world, they cannot trust what the storage is doing, and vice versa. And number two, there is a whole industry now that focuses on storage. There's backups and there's admins and they do this and that, and there's goodness to that. So it was clear that we needed to keep these two separate and yet put them on the same hardware. And hence was born the concept of hyperconvergence, which is what I'm gonna credit it with, along with the rest of my team at Nutanix. We came up with this concept called hyperconvergence, where you can put compute and storage processes on the same platform, but you separate them using virtualization. You separate them using stuff that VMware built. So Carl, some of the stuff that you were involved in.
I can tell you, I was at VMware at the time. I could tell you disrupted VMware and the rest of the market when you came out with this concept of hyperconvergence. And to this day, it's still, a powerful term and architecture used in our industry. In fact, Nutanix is a multi-billion-dollar company. So congratulations on building the first one. But interestingly enough, you did not stop there. There's many, I guess, unicorn founders out there, but there's not a lot to have done it multiple times. So now I'm going to shift you and talk to you about your current company, which, Ashu and I are both, partnering with you on, and that's, Cohesity. So talk to the audience about your decision after doing it once to go do it again.
So Nutanix was a company that disrupted the rough area of what we call primary storage. This is where you run production. And the genesis of Cohesity, at least some of the problems, if not the genesis, was I saw the problems while in Nutanix. Whenever we at Nutanix would ask our customers to back up a Nutanix, they would shy away from it. They're like, well, Nutanix is so simple, and yet backups are so complex and so expensive. And so I knew there was a problem right there. But then I realized there's even a bigger problem, and some of this realization happened after I came out. I realized there's this whole world of what we call secondary data. Primary data is all production stuff, and there's everything else beyond it. If you roughly map them to an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg is your primary data, what the production touches. But then there is this whole world beyond it. Starts with backups, but then how about test and development? That's also the second touch of data. How about analytics? How about going into the cloud? This whole stuff was very complicated. All of it was running in silos. There was, multiple silos for just implementing backups. You had to go to like 5 or 6 different vendors, which is the problem I saw in Nutanix. People thought backups were that complex. But when you start looking at this, there is this whole secondary world where everything is running in a different silo, and it's so hard to manage. And the data here is like the bottom part of the iceberg, which is the bulk of your data. So I'm like, boy, that's a big problem right there waiting to get solved. How about I go solve that? And that's how Cohesity came about. So I'm a big fan of doing companies, and this is advice to whoever else is looking to do companies. I think there needs to be a very well-defined entry point. That's how a company takes off. But there has to be a much bigger vision behind it so that you can keep iterating and growing into that vision. And so the entry point became, let's go solve the problem of legacy backups because they're complex. But the bigger vision became, as a first step, to solve the complexity of secondary storage, so many silos. How about we bring them all together on one platform? But then going beyond that, extend it to the cloud and really make it what we now call data management or enterprise data management. So we are now, after we've gotten this data as a virtue of the fact that we're doing backups, we can do so much more with it. Why let it sit in one silo and just do nothing? It's like an insurance policy. How about you can use it for doing some analytics or test and development, and now you can put stuff on the same platform. You don't have to have multiple silos running all over the place. You can extend this platform to the cloud and do very interesting stuff in the cloud, maybe security, data governance, legal holes, compliance. So the whole new world opens up when you start thinking in that fashion. That's kind of Cohesity.
Yeah, and Mohit, let me add a little bit from the investor and board perspective as to why and what we look for when we're doing investments. There's 2 different types of companies you're trying to find out there in the market. One is a company that will go out and target or attack an existing market that's large but has lacked innovation. And then the other is one that can go out and create a new category, or what we call a category creation company, where you're defining and creating a new category. And the unique thing about Cohesity and why we as Sequoia, from your early days to today, have continued to invest is because we think you're unique in that you're both. There was a massive market out there that was highly fragmented around data protection and data backup, but it lacked innovation. And you brought the innovation to this space and completely disrupted it in a positive way. Disruption can be negative, but in this case, it was positive because you were consolidating the fragmentation and bringing a new architecture that had not been seen because of the lack of innovation. But at the same time, you didn't stop there. You are creating a new category around data management. And the interesting thing is that data management is a technology platform that spans both on-premise and the cloud. It's hybrid. And now you're offering things like data management as a service in partnership with AWS. So the innovation engine that you're bringing to the market is so powerful, and we believe you're creating a new category. And when you combine that with some of the things I spoke about earlier and what we look for our founders, that's why we're so excited about Cohesity and where you're at today and what we think the potential looks like in the future. Now, with that as a backdrop, we know startups are hard and there are pitfalls along the way everyone has to deal with. Maybe you can share with the audience, because they're all out there sitting there thinking, wow, this Mohit guy is pretty special, which he is. He's done the file system at Google. He has 2 unicorn startups, but you and I both know it's really hard to do and you run into challenges. What are some of the pitfalls you've actually run into or you try to avoid, and how did you overcome them?
Well, thank you, Carl. I think I think you started on that track yourself when you said that you look for founders with grit, and I just want to emphasize that. A lot of the audience here again probably are people from IITs. Very smart people. One of the problems we IITians have is that we haven't really tasted that much failure. Smart students probably aced all through our early education, and even at the IITs, I think, we are probably good at our grades and stuff. And boy, you come out in the world out there and do a company and you start failing. You need to really have the perseverance to tolerate failure. If you just fall and then stay down, I promise you, you will not be able to do a company. All the great companies you see out there, and I think Carl can probably talk to that, all the iconic companies that Carl is on the board of, they've all tasted failure multiple times. But these founders, I assure you, have the courage to get back up and walk and run again. So that's the first thing that you need as a founder. Failure is a teacher. It's not something that should dissuade you from giving up. That's if you have that kind of passion, I think you'll eventually build a good company. The second thing I would say, I referred to this also myself. I believe that companies need to have a very well-defined entry point so they can take off, but they need to then grow into a larger vision. I can give so many examples. Amazon started off by being a great book retailer. Now they're doing all sorts of stuff. Now they're, even in retail, they're retailing all sorts of stuff. They have the AWS cloud, a much bigger vision that Jeff Bezos had for the company above and beyond that initial entry point. If you look at Google, Google started off by being a great search engine. And now it's a whole ecosystem with Gmail and Google Maps and Google Apps and so on and so forth. Their bigger vision was to bring the world's knowledge and make it accessible to people. My two humble companies also had, a very well-defined entry point and then a bigger vision. I think Nutanix started off by having a very well-defined entry point in what is called the VDI space, virtual desktops. The problem we addressed was that virtual desktops in the legacy space were very expensive. You had to go buy storage from one vendor, compute from another vendor, networking from a third vendor, and put together a very complicated infrastructure and very expensive infrastructure on which to run virtual desktops. And by the time you build those virtual desktops, the cost of a virtual desktop was more than a laptop, a physical laptop. So Nutanix came in and cut down that cost by approximately a factor of 5 to 10, which made virtual desktops feasible. That's how it took off. But if we had stayed there, boy, the competition would have caught us. And so that's why the bigger vision, which was hyperconvergence and beyond, was important. And so Nutanix kept iterating on that vision while competition was busy catching us up on that virtual desktops, right? So that's how you kind of frustrate competition. Google did the same thing. By the Google's competitors when I was there was the much bigger companies like Microsoft and Yahoo in terms of search, and they did build good search engines. There was a time when Google's SVP of engineering stood in front of the whole company and said, today Yahoo search is probably as good as Google search. But they kept innovating, they kept building on new ideas, and Yahoo eventually gave up that they can never catch up to Google. So I think those two pillars are very important. Having a very well-defined entry point. For Cohesity, the entry point is backups, and then the bigger vision is data management. Because if you don't have one or the other, if you don't have the entry point, you'll never take off. You're building a big vision, nobody cares about a big vision. The customers care about the problems you solve for them today. So you need to have that very well-defined entry point that you can go in and be the king of. But then you need to iterate and go into that bigger vision so that you can frustrate competition from catching up, and you remain competitive and innovative throughout, right? So those are, I think, the pitfalls I see when I talk to some entrepreneurs doing companies. They have one or the other, but not both. The third, I guess, pitfall I would say, Carl, that comes to mind is a lot of us entrepreneurs, a lot of us engineers, we have a very I mentality when we start companies, especially when we do our first companies. it's like, we've been, again, top students. Even when we join industry, we tend to be good at what we do. So there's a lot of, I can move mountains myself. But what people need to realize is they need to become a little bit humble, because great companies are not built with an I, it's built with a V. It's all about teams. It does not matter how good you are. I guarantee you that 5 people of good caliber can do a much better job than each one of them individually. And so, realizing that shift, that it's all about the team. And we started this conversation, by talking about the books I read. And I don't read fiction anymore. I primarily read, books on improving team dynamics. That's my favorite. And if I may give a suggestion, the latest one I read is a book called Extreme Ownership. It's all about teams. This is a team that went to Iraq in the Iraqi war and learned the lessons there, and they have these lessons to any team, be it business, military, or anywhere else. So I read books on optimizing team dynamics and how to lead well, and how to lead teams, and how to make teams work well, because it's all about the V. And that's what some, at least early entrepreneurs, forget or never realize. And it's a short way to fail, because if there's 2 companies, one consists of smart people but all working by themselves, and another consists of maybe not as smart people but working as a team, I guarantee you the team would win.
See, I told you, Ashu, he would have a homework assignment for everyone on this call, and sure enough, it takes it away.
I think you and I are going to have to read up the book before the next board meeting.
Yes, exactly.
Mohit, we've been getting a bunch of questions both today and in fact on the panels yesterday around product market fit. And I know that's a topic that's, one that's very near and dear to your heart. Having gone through this journey a couple of times, maybe you can start by talking about what is product market fit and how do you go about finding it? And how do you know that you don't have it or don't have it?
So Ashu, it's a great question. Sometimes when people refer to product market fit, they talk about the after effects. They talk about, sometimes it's a hockey stick effect, or the tornado, if you may. But in my mind, those are all after effects of having a product market fit. In my mind, and I also want to ask Carl the same question, but my definition of a product market fit is that when an average sales guy can go sell the product to an average customer without involving the headquarters, you have a product market fit. And why are these important? It's an average sales guy because eventually we are looking for repeatability after a product market fit, which means we can hire tons of salespeople and they can sell to tons of customers. Well, when you hire tons of sales guys, they're probably not going to be very elite. They're probably going to be a little bit more average. And when they sell to tons of customers out there, well, that customer is probably not going to be very elite. It's going to be an average customer. And if you involve headquarters, founders, or maybe VPs or product managers in every deal that you go sell, then you're not going to scale. You're not going to be able to sell to thousands of customers. And so product market fit indicates repeatability, and repeatability happens when average sales guys are able to go sell to average customers without involving headquarters. Because now when this becomes true, it means the company can go hire more and more salespeople and sell to more and more companies or more and more customers, and thereby grow rapidly. In my mind, before the product market fit is achieved, the job of the company is to conserve capital and try to achieve a product market fit. Figure out where the points of friction are and iron them out. But suddenly the company has to make a shift after it figures out that it has gotten a product market fit. It's a mistake to hold back after that point. You're just asking competition to catch up to you. After that, they should just press on the gas and go take over the market. But Carl, this is, I'm talking about experiences from my couple of companies, and you have way more that you see in Sequoia. But
How do you define
like
product
to,
market
would like to flip it to you. Your definition of product market fit, how you think about it.
No, I think that's well said. And Ashu and I see a lot of younger companies trying to find product market fit. And I think there's a couple things that you said that resonated with me and I actually agree with. So first of all, I like to keep things simple. I think to find product market fit, you have to have a very simple and straightforward value proposition where you find a wedge into a company and you're solving a pain that they already have. Creating a pain and then solving it is a lot harder. So product market fit typically moves from being founder-led sales like you did in the early days to you start to get one or two sales reps who start to help iron out what that product market fit looks like. And then you move to the scaling phase where you bring in a whole bunch of sales reps and they're able to sell it and you start to pick up velocity sales. Now to do that, you have to have a couple things. You have to have, as I said, a very simple, straightforward value proposition. In the case of Cohesity, that was easily identifiable. You guys were consolidating a fragmented market, and you had one of the strongest value propositions you can ever have in sales, and that was a strong ROI. People talk about solution selling and being creative and all of this, but nothing sells better than showing a customer real savings on dollars, number one. Number two, you simplify operations because you move from fragmentation to a consolidated view of of anything, in this case, data. So that's another area that I think you established. And then lastly, I think an area where people complexify, if you will, their business and have a hard time finding product market fit is when they have a platform solution. Today, Mohit, Cohesity has a platform. In fact, when you started the company, you said, I'm going to build a platform company. But you never go to market initially as a platform company because it is very hard to sell and find product market fit. Instead, what you do is you find a wedge. You found a wedge on backup and data protection. And once you get in there, people start to recognize this is a great use case, but there's more to this solution than what I'm using it today for. And it then turns horizontally and becomes a platform. But the risk in product market fit is people want to sell the vision, the bigger vision, and they don't focus on the opportunity that's at hand to get that product market fit established and build velocity. That's what I see. Ashu, how about you?
I think, Carl, you're spot on. I think Mohit's bar for product market fit, and Mohit and I have had this conversation a few times, including in companies that we've partnered together on, where he's an investor. I think it's spot on, this notion of the average sales guy being able to sell, or salesperson being able to sell to the average customer. I think the challenge is that that's a very, very high bar. I know companies that have 100+ customers that are not there yet. And so the question is, how do you get them to that journey? And where along the way are you ready to sort of declare success in the sense of let's step on the gas versus where do you hold back? And I think that's where some of the things that you've talked about, do you have clarity on the value proposition? Are you starting to see customers buy more and renew in the case of, especially in the case of SaaS software, where renewal and engagement data tells you a lot more about product market fit? I think the challenge though, and I want to come back to Mohit, to you on this, is product market fit isn't a one-time thing. It keeps evolving. And I've been at the receiving end of companies that had amazing product market fit and would meet every one of the definitions we talked about. And then 2 years later, it kind of evaporated, because the market moved on, the market's expectations changed, or they started adding new features, or as they expanded the customer set they were serving, new customer sets, segments had different expectations. So Mohit, maybe you can talk a little bit about how that has evolved, especially in both cases. You've gone from one product to multiple products. And so how do you deal with product market fit in that journey?
So Ashu, again, if you go to the basic definition, you need to be able to sell to an average customer. Now, if some other disruptive company comes, or if the market shifts, and that customer is no longer interested in what you're selling, well, that's a problem. So you've lost your product market fit. And one thing that helps sustain, the product market fit is if you can innovate continuously. So the value you provide to that average customer, maybe X when you started with, but it's much more than X, as you innovate further. And so having a very well-defined entry point, or what Carl called a wedge, and then a bigger vision that you can iterate on, you continuously provides that more and more stuff to that average customer. So he keeps getting more and more interested, and it keeps thwarting and frustrating competition, because they can never quite build a product that's as good as you, because by the time they catch up, well, you've gone ahead. So that's one way by which you can frustrate competition and keep your product market fit. Now another way is just stickiness. Once for instance eBay or WhatsApp, once people come to that site, it's unlikely that they'll go to another one, because it's a crowd thing. Wherever the crowd is, it's very hard to pull the crowd to another site. And so sometimes it's the stickiness of the offering that keeps the product market fit. But sometimes in the case of my companies, the product market fit has stayed because we've just innovated continuously, thereby delighting our customers and giving them more and more. And so they now look forward to, and we are not unique in that. I mean, look at Apple. There are diehard Apple fans because Apple keeps delighting their customers on what's coming next. So they don't want to go away from the iPhone or what have you, even if like the contender, the competitive smartphone has one feature that looks appealing, because they know that Apple will not only catch up, but probably will give something even better in the future. And so that's the love you need to create. That's the delight you need to create in the minds of customers before you firmly are in that product market fit category. But otherwise, nothing is permanent. If you just rest on your laurels, the customers will stick with you for a couple of years, but then another disruptive product comes by and they'll go to that. So you have to keep disrupting yourself. I think Carl has a statement, and I want to pass it to Carl. Carl has a statement: before somebody else disrupts you, you should disrupt yourself. So Carl, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, no.
Carl, just quick announcement for the audience before you respond to that. There's a poll going on, and so anyone who's listening, you can access the poll from the poll panel. So feel free to do that. But with that interruption, Carl, back to you.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think to your point of continuous innovation, right? There's multiple ways to innovate. And if you are not thinking about how to disrupt yourself, someone else will disrupt you. And you always want to be on the tip of your toes, leaning forward into your customers, into the market, as opposed to the heels of your foot, where you're on your back foot because of competition disrupting you. And that's the one thing, Mohit, I loved about what you've been doing on the journey of Cohesity. You've been disrupting not just yourself technologically, you've been disrupting yourself in business models. You've gone through multiple business model transitions, from being an appliance and hardware to separating the two, now to moving to a pure SaaS play, now to managing and running in the cloud. So you got to continuously think about innovation, and innovation comes in three different ways, Mohit. The first is organic innovation, which is what is the power behind Cohesity. You guys continuously are bringing new products and features to market. There's innovation inorganically, where you look outside the company. You guys have made a couple small acquisitions where you see a product market fit opportunity, and maybe you can't innovate fast enough, so you go out and you do it, through an inorganic innovation, through an acquisition. And then the other side, kind of back to the question of selling products into the market and product market fit, I think there's a lot of innovation that can take place on the go-to-market side, but people don't think about that. You can do a lot of creative things on how you price and you package your products, how you get customers access to technology faster than they maybe would have on their own. So there is just a lot of things you can do to disrupt yourself. We live in the Silicon Valley, or there in India. There is a lot of people, with these ideas to do startups. And although, Cohesity is still considered a startup, we're getting to be a sizable company. And I'm sure there's people that are saying, I got to go figure out how to disrupt Mohit, because he's disrupted so many people themselves. And the only way you can do that is with continuous innovation, which is exactly what you're doing. Maybe before we start to wrap up here, I have one other question, Mohit, and you kind of touched on it a little bit when you were talking about your team. I've watched you emerge and even transform as a leader to a point where now you talk about culture and the importance of culture in a company and how it is what ultimately holds everyone together and gets you over some of the challenges that you've had in the past or going forward. So why don't you see about answering that question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience to get some questions from them.
Yeah, Carl, I think we could have spent this whole session on culture. I'm a bit maniacal about that, but I'll start by saying this. First and foremost, we spend, in a typical workday, we spend maybe 8 to 10 hours with family, and that includes the time that we sleep. And we spend so many more hours with our coworkers. So it's very important that the employees of the company go to their workplace and experience a great culture, because that's what it's like. It should be family away from family. If they don't feel that, first of all, they're probably not going to stay there for very long. Second of all, they'll not be at their best. They'll not be producing. They'll not be working with the passion. They won't make the company's mission their mission. If you give them a great culture, this feels like home. The mission feels like it's no longer the company's mission or the founder's mission. It's their mission. Boy, I am in this to disrupt the market, in that fashion. So it's very important to create a great culture. Now let's talk about the importance of explicitly doing things to create a great culture. When the company is small, everyone knows everyone. If it's less than 20 people or 50 people, everyone knows everyone, and everyone kind of knows, what's expected. Every company tends to have a slightly different culture, but they all know that, okay, this is the culture. But as you go beyond that, as you go to 100 people and then 200 people and more, there is no person A probably doesn't even talk to person B. So how do you make sure that there is uniformity in the culture? So I am a big fan of starting with some guidelines, if you may. These are your core values. And this is where I'll cite another book, Good to Great. It's a very famous book by an author called Jim Collins. And this person, he studied lots of great companies and their counterparts. In the same environment, the great companies did like 10x better than their counterparts. And why? Well, one of the things that he found was these great companies had core values. It doesn't matter what exactly the core values were. They may be different, but the fact that they stood for something and the fact that their employees united around those core values was the important part. And so that kind of tells you when the 500 person joins the company and the company makes an effort to push the core values, they know what's valued in this company. They know what the way to operate with other people that's going to be viewed well. And so we at Cohesity go out of the way to kind of push our core values. A lot of companies have tons of core values, 15, 20 of them, and you go ask any employee, they don't even know what they are. We made it a conscious choice to keep our set of core values very small. It's just 5 core values. You can remember them by the acronym RADIO. R stands for respect. We respect everyone, irrespective of where they come from, their religion, their workplace, where they grew up, that sort of stuff. A stands for attitude or positive attitude. We just don't, there's always problems. But if you go deal with them with a positive attitude, you can move mountains. But if you just whine all the time and complain all the time, you're just going to bring down the whole environment, right? So attitude is very important. D stands for delivery. Everyone needs to deliver. Nice people don't necessarily make the company. Yeah, we want everyone to be nice, but we really want them to deliver. Even I have to deliver. If I'm not delivering, then I'm frankly don't deserve to be the CEO anymore. I stands for integrity. We just don't tolerate, low integrity behavior, like backstabbing, politics, that sort of stuff is just not us. And O stands for obsession or customer obsession. Everything we do eventually needs to benefit the customer somewhere. We're not sitting in a cave and building theoretical stuff that's not going to benefit anyone. Eventually, it's all about the customer. We have to delight customers, and that's the core values, and that's what unites everyone on what they're doing. If someone's not doing something right, it's much easier to tell them you're not in compliant with so and so core value. And violating a core value is sort of like a felony offense in my companies. I mean, you don't get fired for the first felony offense. We try to, work with you to fix you. But if we realize that there's no way to fix you, you'll keep violating it, then frankly, you'll be happy somewhere else. You're not going to be part of our family. You don't comply with our core values, right? It's the same as a family. We treat our employees like a family. When we are in a family and the family has some values, if you keep violating them, probably the family is going to throw you out.
Mohit, I have a request for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a document or video for that?
We probably do.
Can you share that with us? I want to send out to 800 plus companies have registered, and we have 14,000 registration.
We are more than happy to do that.
Please, I will love to share it. It's brilliant. Even if 10 people get sorry, I'm interjecting, but phenomenal conversation. I just couldn't resist what you guys are saying. But I have one question for 4 of you, actually. Just one question. We put you on a startup track, and Mohit, thank you very, very much for that. Ashu, thanks. Carl, you are not an IITian, so the big thanks to you. Mohit and Ashu, I don't even care.
We had no choice.
They don't have much of a choice. So big thanks to all of you. But on a serious note, I want to give a challenge to our 14,000 attendees. And challenge is very simple. You tell me one of the problem you believe worth solving. And if you find the solution, you will invest. I'm not going to put your name. I'm just looking for the challenge. So each of you give one challenge. If that problem can be solved, that's interesting and it's worth solving. Because there are a lot of problems which we may be able to solve, but it's not worth solving. So one problem, define problem with the key KPIs, anything. I'll give you 3 of you a few minutes while I talk to Animesh and he can talk about startup track. How's that?
Okay.
All right. Animesh, why don't you share with all of our audience, how was it? How was the experience?
It has been very good, Sanjeev. Hello to our audience again. I see people have joined us over time. I've been monitoring the chat and stuff. I'm really happy that you guys are having a good time. Mohit and Carl and Ashu, extremely nice comments coming from the audience. They really liked all this stuff. I myself have been taking notes and putting sticky notes on a monitor with all the books to read. So there's homework for all of us. Overall in the track, we had 450 startups who showed up to talk about what they're working on. We finally were able to find time only for 33 in the spotlight sessions. We had one session yesterday with 16 in the US. We had 10 in India. Honestly, it started off at 10:30 p.m. Pacific. At some point, I was like, I think I'm just gonna go to bed. I'm gonna watch it radio or the recording later. I found myself up till 1:30. They were so interesting. As I mentioned previously, one of them was a lithium battery, which does not catch fire. Like, all right, then that's good. That's a good battery to have. And there was a bunch of very interesting pieces. Then today at 12:45 p.m., I invite you all to come back after the upcoming keynote to spotlight number 2 in the US time, where we'll have 7 more startups talking about this. I also would encourage you all to take a look at the startup showcase. If you click on booth and filter on the startup category, you will see all the startups who applied initially have been given a space to talk about themselves. Please go check them out. And finally, this is not the end by far. This is the beginning. This is the first time we have been able to get the startups across all IITs. In fact, this time around, we had 15 IITs represented in the startups and 450 who came in. We absolutely want to give them a space to talk about themselves. Similarly, we have had mentors, about 40 of them coming in to give feedback. We also want to give them a space. And we have purposefully not made this a pitching contest. It's a showcase. We are not looking for one winner because the pie is big enough. So we appreciate all of you. Expect more emails from me. I'll be spamming you all. Back to you, Sanjeev.
That's awesome. So, Carl, should we start with you?
Well, Sanjeev, you can start with me, but I'm going to, just like you threw us off, I'm going to throw you off because I'm going to answer it slightly different. Because there's a
Love
lot
it.
of great things that need to be innovated or created for the world, but I don't have one off the top of my mind. But I'd like to really more address your audience and say, for the startups that are taking place in India, think big, think bold. Don't think about creating a company that's going to service your local market, but think about how you can build a business that transcends the world and moves into the United States and sells into all markets globally. IIT has a tremendous amount of talent coming out each and every day. The alumni is stronger than ever. And I know, thinking about it through the eyes of Sequoia US and our partnership with Sequoia India, we are highly impressed with the talent that you produce year in and year out. And we just want to continue to partner with you and the rest of those entrepreneurs out there. So my message is, if you want me to say, what do you want to create? Create a big company, think global. The world is your playground. Go enjoy the time you have.
Awesome. Very well said, Carl. I couldn't have said better. Go bold or go home.
Go for it, Mohit. I'll let you go next. That's a hard one to follow.
All right.
right.
Come on, Ashu, you should take the challenge from Carl. What are you talking about?
All right, I'll go next. So I would say that, look, distributed system software is getting very sophisticated. Now we have huge companies, Amazon, Google, and whatnot, and all of us are building a huge distributed system software. Now, the way it's built, we still have humans coding all the, low-level details. So if someone could come up with a way to build a company that can sort of, in an artificial intelligence kind of way, build this software. So it's a level of abstraction, it's a level of interaction. So the humans build software that can then build software. That would be an incredibly interesting idea, because that would phenomenally, speed up the pace at which we can build this distributed system software. So that would be one idea that I would like to throw out there. And if someone does that,
Animesh, how do you make
Mohit,
it?
I have a company for you. I just invested in a company called AnyScale, which is very early. It's a spin out of the AMP lab in Berkeley that is trying to do that, but very early days. It's trying to create an abstraction to create distributed systems. But Sanjeev, to answer your question, I want to build in what Carl said. Look, if I've learned one lesson across sort of the last couple of decades of sort of being involved with startups, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to do something small or something gigantic. It's exceptionally hard to start a company. And it will feel very often that you will be banging your head against a wall. And it will very often feel like, hey, this just is not the rational thing to do. And we talked a fair bit on the panel yesterday about this. When you start a company, almost always it is an NPV negative proposition. And so with that, if that is the case, it's not a rational thing to do to start a company. So if you do it, go big. Because at least if you succeed, if you're one of the handful of people that is the next Mohit, that is able to create the next Cohesity, at least you've tried to do something that is huge as against something that is small. So solve large problems, and then you'll find that people will come around to support you to do that. And the bigger the problem, the bigger the opportunity, the more people want to be part of that solution. But I will pick an idea. I will pick a specific idea.
I like that about Ashu. You will give something finally.
Yeah, many of us are Indians who are, we all deal with one problem, which is our desire for sugar. And the one thing that is the most corrosive substance for the human body is sugar. So this dichotomy of it's probably more addictive, the data shows, than cocaine on one hand, and on the other hand, and we all want it. It's the most corrosive substance that you could put into your bodies. So if anyone can figure out a way to solve for that sort of dichotomy, I think that's $1 trillion company.
Ashu, I want to invest in it. I love sugar.
All right, so I have two investors.
Problem every single day, and I know Sanjeev and I have talked about this a few times. So if you can solve for that, I think we're all in.
We will solve it because now we can even play with DNA. That's how we are fixing the problem of COVID. So it's phenomenal, the technology. I had several conversations with experts who understand how our body behave and how with microbiome you can change the whole world around us. So it's a phenomenal work happening in the health space. We are talking about illness optional, even aging optional. And personally, I feel if I look at myself and I look at my parents and where we are far more healthier. So we have done a lot of improvements to the human body. 50 is new 30. In a fact,
Absolutely.
And things I do in my life today, I couldn't do in 30s. So I agree with you. Health is definitely one area, but I'll give a simple challenge. I am the conference chair of this summit for last 2 days, and I'm the face. This video experience is not interesting. It's really bad. I know I have put a lot of almost 14,000 people through hell to just watch us with shitty videos. I'm sorry for that. But that's the idea. Can we fix it? Do we need new kind of Kodak? We need new system. Mohit, you should be founding or finding somebody to do this. I mean, the damn simple video I can't do. This is ridiculous. 5 of us cannot do that. Even my face color, his face. It's just ridiculous. Simple thing. We can't do simple video. And this problem is going to get worse and worse because we are working from home. Infrastructure is a problem. Cohesity is doing tremendous job of data. Mohit and me had a great conversation around on Impact series. By the way, we got great hit and the article is coming on that too. So you will see it. A lot of, we had great fun. So we are late. So I want to close this panel. I want to thank all of you and all the work you have done. You guys are phenomenal. Ashu, please join the volunteers thank at 2:30. Please, it's in the same session as closing session. Mohit and Carl, I can't thank you enough. And it's phenomenal. But before I let you go, I made a promise and I need a lot of help. Knowing, that's what the problem with the entrepreneur. We take the problem we can't handle. So the problem I took it is, so today, Piyush Goyal, our minister from India, gave us a challenge. And the idea I told him is that we are going to mentor 10,000 entrepreneurs in next 5 years. And I will convince 1,000 IITians to help me. So I need a lot of help. It's not about money, it's about coaching and mentoring. I agree with Carl. It's about helping them so they can think bigger. And we see all these kids come to us, phenomenal talent, but they are not thinking big. They are still stuck. How can I make something small, a small app here and there? But they're brilliant. With some coaching, some mentoring, I believe they can do a phenomenal job. And we owe it to the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the audience as well for coming in. We will see you at the main keynote stage, and then at 12:45, we'll see you back for Spotlight number 2 and the closing of the startup session. Thanks, Mohit. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.